So let me introduce our panel. If you give me the panel slide. Thank you. I hope you know me. I chair the Commonplace. I'm also now chair at the Heritage Alliance, and I chair the LLDC Planning Committee as a member of the board of LLDC. Can I have the others, please? I'm introducing to you Chris Hogwood, Managing Director of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Landsec, and a major UK developer, as we all know. Tony Burton, who I love the description of as a free-range consultant in community planning, design and environment. Tony and I go back decades, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say, as well as that of Chris, of course. And Benji Mayer is our Vice President Product at Commonplace, and he's going to tell you about a lot of the exciting things that we are doing with our products here. So let me begin. I'm going to set the scene in brief. Since 2020 and the August White Paper, we've had a very clear direction for digital planning. We've started down the road, and there's huge energy and expertise driving us forward. The idea of a 21st century digital planning system has been developing for several years. It was championed with government by the Connected Places Catapult when it was Future Cities Catapult, of which I was a board member. Led by Stefan Webb and Ewan Mills, we developed a vision, a framework for shared principles, and some innovative tools for digitising and sharing planning data, which we presented on the government stand at MIPIM back in 2017, I think. Ewan is now in the DLUC digital team, and it's government support for this that will be transformational. He and Stefan are both still deeply involved, and the Catapult continues to support these innovations. But the white paper, Planning for the Future, was absolutely critical. It set out a bold proposal for sweeping planning system reform, including, amongst other things, a move towards a more zonal system of planning consent, a vision for digital planning that included an intensification of community engagement in plan making, and digital planning data and interactive digital mapping as the bedrock of a 21st century planning system. Meanwhile, in the last 2 years, the whole country has become more digitally literate, expecting smooth online tools, both personally and at work. For example, in my new role, I've been hearing about the Heritage Digital projects, which the Heritage Alliance has led, funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, to build digital skills and audiences across the many organisations who care for our built and natural heritage. I'm not going to predict what will be in the widely anticipated Levelling Up and Planning White Paper, but we do know that the vision for real empowered engagement within a very broadly scoped digitally empowered system, at least, is still intact. This vision has provided the burning platform, the incentive, and indeed some government funding for deeper thinking and innovation within and outside government over the last 18 months. And here is why this matters so much. Next slide, please. To bring us into the 21st century, away from these plastic bits of torn paper on lampposts and into something that suggests we really care what people think, the digital team in the department has been developing digital planning policies and tools with a very practical approach. They've recently launched 2 rounds of a PropTech engagement fund. Round 1 was £1 million strong. Round 2 is funding 10 projects at up to £125,000 per local authority, all to support local councils innovating in digital engagement around planning. This has led to innovation that might otherwise have been deemed too risky for local authorities. For example, we at Commonplace are working with Camden, Cotswolds, Dacorum, and with Watford, developing a planning application system that provides easy access for residents to planning data that actually means something to them, that they can engage with, the sort of vision on the right-hand side of the slide. And I know Benji is going to say more about this. Another example of progress in the last 18 months is the Brownfield Site Data Service that the DLUC Digital Land team has just released as a prototype. You can filter and explore the brownfield sites as a list or on a map, and we may well use the service to support new features on Commonplace later this year. At Commonplace, we published an Engaging for the Future report early last year, which reiterated and developed some of the key principles, emphasising that to be effective, digital engagement has to be continuous, it has to be joined up throughout the planning cycle, and it has to be a looped conversation with real feedback, not a survey or a one-off engagement on local plans, but then no involvement in the applications that matter to people. So the direction of travel is clear, and exciting progress has been made since the white paper was published. Excellent new tools are moving the agenda forward practically on the ground, meeting real planning needs and using technology to make the planning process both easier for planners and applicants and more engaging for citizens. With better and more accessible data sets, easily searched, with specialist solutions for local government, applying digital mapping to their specific needs, whether in the call for sites, the management of planning applications, or the master plans. Companies are looking to integrate their digital platforms and systems to bring the best of breeds together. All parties are seeing and believing that it can be done and getting great ideas as to what can be done. Seeing the proof of innovation removes some of the risk and enables more people to come on board. Flagship projects have broken new ground in public engagement and won many awards, such as the Mini Holland schemes in Waltham Forest and Leeds City Council's public transport strategy. At Commonplace, we're passionate about driving engagement in planning. It is what we're here to do. And we've been lucky to have been able to expand enormously over the last 2 years as digital confidence has increased and demands and expectations have risen. We've grown fourfold from a small company to nearly 50 people now. We're investing heavily in partnering to help to define what the future of planning looks like with everyone in the sector, working with other technology providers in the planning space to figure out new ways of making the whole system work better. For example, working with iDocs, who are already suppliers of back office planning functions to many local authorities. We work with View City to link their 3D visualizations to our consultation offer, and we'll be launching new partnerships with data and interface companies in the near future. We also partner with industry leaders, not just the leading developers, but also with the Quality of Life Foundation to embed their framework and methodology into our platform. We've launched a post-occupancy product, the first accredited solution we'll be offering to our customers. But today, we're here to talk about the planning system. Yet many of these new digital data sets, engagement and analytical tools, skills, and the engagement they will support are going to be incredibly helpful in supporting levelling up, our post-COVID recovery, our response to the changes in retail and town centres, our new export and import opportunities after Brexit. So I'm very keen to hear what our panelists have to say. Now, you get the slides unless you click on our faces. If you'd like to hear watch the panelists rather than the slide, please do click on their face. And I'm going to introduce first Chris, who is, as I said, the Managing Director of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Landsec, one of our longest private sector customers who we are incredibly proud to be working with. And he's going to give us the developer's perspective on how digital planning and engagement works for applicants and what the benefits are to his company. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Pam. Really appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Don't feel obliged to click on my face, despite Pam's exhortations. So just to give a bit of context about us as a business, I'm sure many people are broadly familiar with Landsec. I've worked here now for a year. Previously, I was in consultancy before joining Landsec. But as a business, we've really honed down the types of places we're trying to create. I think the areas that we're known a little bit more are our central London offices. I'm in our Victoria office at the moment. Our retail destinations, so places like Trinity in Leeds, Bluewater in Kent, and so on. And the thing we're doing more and more of are what we are terming mixed-use urban neighbourhoods. So really taking sort of large-scale development opportunities to create neighbourhoods, in effect, that you really need to involve people in. And I think that's a big part of the context for why we work with Commonplace, and I think why we've actually really sort of increased our relationship with them since I've been here. I thought it'd be helpful for me to give my kind of perspective on where we are in terms of planning and what we're doing. I think some of the challenges in terms of what the government was sort of setting out in terms of digital planning, how we're responding to that, where we sit is in the context, and then a few bits of probably wild speculation on what I think happens next, on what is probably quite a frenzied day in Westminster speculation, which is obviously the context in which we're operating. So jumping back to the planning white paper, I think one of the things I liked about it, and I'm not 100% wedded to the document overall, one of the things I liked about it was the thrust about how trying to make it easier for people to engage with it. And I think digital is clearly seen as a big part of that. That has to be a way of opening up access. And I think the white paper was good at signaling a direction, but perhaps lacked a little bit of substance. Now, I think one of the challenges we face in planning reform is how far and how fast government's going to go on it, and therefore how much it's genuinely going to embrace a proper digital revolution in terms of planning. As you all know, we find ourselves in a bit of a limbo because, I mean, well, politics, which is probably a phrase I'll use a fair bit over the next couple of minutes. One of the things I particularly liked, as someone who did a lot of consultancy to developers in my earlier parts of my career, from the white paper, was really focusing on how to involve people at the local plan stage. As Pam was sort of saying, it's really important to get that kind of sense of dialogue going early on and then continuing it through. I think it's fair to say the white paper probably didn't envisage the continued dialogue, but definitely bringing that dialogue in earlier into the process is really important to my mind. I mean, I've lost count on the number of times I've been in sort of town halls, often in London and places outside of London, where you end up having to communicate back to both the public, but actually also councillors what their local plan says. One of my more depressing moments early on in my career was spending time I won't tell you which local authority, but we were doing a scheme which was housing development. It was right next to 2 tube stations, in effect, and a bus garage. And therefore, obviously, zero parking was being offered except for sort of those in need. And the members were just angry at us for doing this and really couldn't get their head around that it was something that their own documentation pointed us towards. So I think if you've got members not really understanding what's in the local plan, how can you possibly get the public really engaged in that? And I think digital can clearly play a big part in that. As I said, I was a consultant to developers before coming in-house, and I wasn't a sort of free-range consultant like Tony. I suppose a little bit more battery-farmed, in the sense that I was operating less ranging, more sort of in a box. One of my clients in those points in time was a business called U&I, and I'm sure some people will have seen we, as a business, Landsec, have actually recently acquired U&I as a developer. It's a business I know really, really well. And one of the things we spent a lot of time lobbying on when I was working for them was improving data, particularly around brownfield land. We've had this sort of really big drive to deliver more homes, and general political consensus has been that brownfield is the way to do it. But at no point in time did we ever know how much brownfield opportunity there was, who owned it, how you could put it all together. And it felt, therefore, like a huge missed opportunity. And I think from a sort of, the more we think about the way we're engaging in cities and places at a strategic level, properly understanding where the land is, how it can be assembled, what the opportunities are, I think is a really big win. And if that's something that we can unlock, then I think that will be a really positive step. I thought it'd be helpful to set out a little bit about where I think planning reform is going to sit in the broader political agenda. And obviously today, if anyone was on Twitter late last night like I was, is really set to be a quite stressful day for everyone in Westminster, but therefore great to pay attention to as a punter. And so big caveats on everything I'm about to say, because, well, politics and everything could change. I was in discussion with the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Homes and Communities team recently, and the strong suggestion was that the Levelling Up white paper, much delayed, is going to follow towards either the end of next week or the week after, once they've sort of made a move on the COVID restrictions. Now, the more I've spoken to people in and around government, and certainly the intention of what they want to do with the Levelling Up white paper, is it's going to be a government-wide strategy. It's going to inform lots of different things. So business rates reform will follow, planning reform will follow. So I think if you look at digital planning and planning reform in the context of Levelling Up, you'll start to see some interesting action on it. Now, we obviously know that delivering new homes was a big thrust behind the previous white paper reforms, and also that's why they were halted. But if you track Michael Gove's career, I think it's fair to say he never really shies away from a challenge. And even if the PM is replaced, whoever replaces him should probably be savvy enough to know that you can't pull back into a sort of Operation Red Meat comfort blanket, because that's not where the electorate is. The electorate has some expectations. So I think it's worth looking back at the PM's conference speech on levelling up, which basically promised actually much more development nationwide and away from the southeast. I suspect that whoever replaces Boris Johnson, if he is in fact removed from office, will need to find some time to deliver on that agenda. So turning back to our core subject, digital planning, in that thrust of things, I think we'll see much more momentum around it, because actually how people are thinking about place, how actually place plays a real a meaningful role in people's life chances and in the levelling up agenda, I think means that there is a really good runway for how digital planning can expand. Now, I think making it easier for people to engage with the planning system through digital is a massively positive thing. But I think it's really important that it won't succeed if we fail to make planning relevant to the end user, the customer, if you will. Now, I know we're all a bunch of, I guess, placemaking geeks in this chat, and I mean that in a very kind way. But as with politics, the average person doesn't care that much about planning until it's sort of turning into a car crash and going wrong in front of them. So my view, particularly since joining Landsec in-house, is we need to work much harder to help people understand their ability to shape the places where they live and why they should exercise that ability. That's something we're thinking a lot about at Landsec. We're developing a community charter that sort of sets out how we want to involve people both in our places when we're not doing development, but even more in an even more focused way during periods of development. We actually have appointed a new community engagement manager starting. Wonder whether they're on this call or not, I should find out. And we're really thinking about how we can involve people in a much deeper, longer conversation about their local area. Now, digital is 100% part of that, and we have a relationship with Commonplace, and we've increased our relationship with them since I've joined, because we really see that as a real way forward. But I don't think we should look at digital as sort of a silver bullet that fixes everything. If I borrow a bit from my stock in trade, which is effectively advising organisations on how they communicate, if you take a boring subject and create digital content from it, all you'll really succeed in doing is boring an even greater number of people about it, unless you take the time to make it properly relevant to your target audience. And that's a hugely challenging thing. And I think part of the gap in the government's sort of thrust on digital planning is it's making it local government's issue without necessarily thinking through about the structure for how local government can respond. And I think just sort of telling local government to stick it on the internet without any real support isn't going to get it done well or successfully. So I end by saying something that I tend to say on most panels I get invited to take part in. So sorry if this is boring to hear it from me. If you resource local government more effectively and more properly, it's more likely to get done well. Pam, back to you. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely right. I suppose it's encouraging that they're starting with funding for local government, but we all know how much the resources in local government planning departments have been cut over the last several decades. Let's be honest with ourselves. Thanks, Chris. Go on, tell us what on Twitter. I mean, yes, lots more letters to 1922. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, so the threshold is expected to be passed today, depending on which wild speculation you want. So,
well, let's not go into that. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed something.
No, nothing.
Even more unpredictable. But what I was going to say was, I think we must all know that the Levelling Up white paper, if it's coming out, is going to be an election manifesto, isn't it? So it's got to be exciting. If it's too boring, it won't do its job, will it? So lots of opportunity there. Please do send your questions in on the Q&A bit. I've got 2 so far. I'm sure there's more in the audience than that, because I've just looked at who's with us, and we have some very interesting people. That's all of you. So over to Tony, I think. Tony needs very little introduction in my view, but then that's my view. So let me just give you a tiny bit of background. He has an encyclopedic knowledge and involvement in planning at all levels. He's been a passionate advocate of neighbourhood planning, as well as leading on a number of national bodies. I'm not going to run through them all, and projects where planning is central. And I imagine, Tony, you're going to tell us about the community perspective. Over to you.
How did you guess, Pam? Yes, that's the brief, and that's where I'm coming from. So, I mean, thank you to Commonplace for pulling together the webinar. It's already clear, even from the little we've heard before we get into the questions, that these are exciting times for everyone who's interested in what digital can do to give communities a stronger voice in those planning decisions. As Pam has hinted, I'm approaching this from the perspective of someone who's spent much of the last 30 years supporting local community groups get involved in planning as an advocate and practitioner of neighbourhood planning, and as someone who, in a civic society, is on an almost daily basis, wrestling with developers and local planners in my own corner of London, where even the existence of digital tools is only just beginning to register on the radar. I think it's important to start by recognising just how broken our planning system is when it comes to community engagement. The process is arcane, the professional culture is resistant, the levels of trust in public bodies are in virtual freefall. We're given too much one-off consultation to meet a legal requirement and very little continuous engagement, and next to no genuine collaboration and co-design. The planning white paper promises to change this to, quote, create great communities through world-class civic engagement. And it's a great ambition. We should take it at face value, but let's not kid ourselves, this is the true policymaker priority, even as we hold their feet to the fire and demand the support and investment that will be required. It makes progress even more important on digital because it's the one area that still has some momentum and where significant change is already beginning to happen. So where digital goes, other things can follow. There's so much to change, it's hard to even know where to start. At Neighbourhood Planners London, which is the informal network we've pulled together for neighbourhood planners in the capital, we've identified 3 priorities: more map-based and 3D systems to track, influence, and understand both policy and planning applications, to move beyond the tyranny of Planning Explorer and its like; new ways to engage and involve communities in setting priorities, with Commonplace as a standout example; and thirdly, new ways to combine multiple data sources and build evidence bases which are tailored to the needs and geography of local communities, and a point to Tourism's natural neighbourhoods as providing pointers as to what can be achieved there. But there are big risks as well as opportunities in this dash for digital. While digital tools and approaches can engage new and larger audiences and bring fresh insights, it mustn't be at the expense of other traditional approaches and of voices who do not engage digitally. Nor can it replace the depth and detail and emotion that comes from face-to-face engagement. Nor should it even replace the good old planning notice on a lamppost, which has had a lot of ribbing in recent months, but still has a role. For me, the lamppost notice also provides some degree of nostalgia, as its very existence is down to a campaign, hard won, and amendments tabled to planning legislation back in 1991, when I was at CPRE, and we succeeded in making some form of basic publicity a legal requirement for all planning applications. The richness of today's debate is a sign of how far we've come since then. My work at My Society, where I'm a trustee, and the work there on the benefits, on who benefits from civic technology, has shown that the digital tools that are available are largely being used by more people who are older, male, white, well-educated, employed, and politically engaged. In other words, people like me. And we all know what a mess these kinds of people have made of the world, don't we? It's not helped that the Planning White Paper's commitment to digital came alongside plans to remove the public's right to have a say on planning applications. Whilst this has now been removed, it does demonstrate this disconnect. We only have a short window within which to tackle some of these fundamental issues. All data and all digital tools reflect the values of those who control and design them. Local authorities and developers and professionals are already in on the act, working on PropTech and creating the new digital world. This new world needs instead to be designed with communities and with communities in mind. We also need to put in place the means for local communities to access, to understand, and to use digital tools and data for the things that matter to them. Nobody's going to shed a tear for the PDF, but simply providing more open data isn't going to be enough. Communities are already drowning in information, and too little is being used to effect change. Neighbourhood planning has demonstrated the value of providing relatively small amounts of funding and technical support. Just a few £1 million a year has given real meaning to this community right to plan that might otherwise have only been taken up by a few. There are now over 3 times more neighbourhood plans in the country than local plans, and it has been delivering a quiet revolution in community power over planning decisions. Which brings me to my final point about the level of ambition we have for what can be achieved through the use of digital tools. The innovations in digital planning can be so much more than managing old processes in new ways, or even creating new opportunities to harness data and engage people in generating and using information. It can support more radical change. For me, the really exciting opportunities are where data and digital and social movements meet. We need the digital planning revolution to be linked to stronger democratic processes, with planning policy and decisions driven by more participative as well as representative approaches. When digital planning enables a new digital civics, it takes on a new and much wider relevance that goes well beyond those currently involved in planning. It starts to get to the heart of what people care about, and it allows us to mobilize and campaign and build social movements that both inform and make decisions about every day about our lives and our neighborhoods, and not just when others decide to put in a planning application or when local politicians call an election. And on that note, can I thank Commonplace for bringing us together for the webinar and look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you very much, Tony. And you started with trust, and I think what you said at the end finished with trust too. It's all right for us as professionals to have fun creating these tools and using them, but we need trust across communities, and that needs support for communities to feel that they're leading as well as being given tools that the local authorities or government want them to have. Very important, and I hope we'll discuss that more when we get into questions. One of the issues that's coming up in questions, which I suspect Benji may be about to address, is that digital should never operate on its own. Many people don't have good access, many people aren't comfortable on digital. How do we make sure that using digital tools, we're not excluding people? I don't know if that is one of the things you're going to talk about, Benji, but let me introduce you. We'll talk about it later anyway under questions. As our Vice President, I don't know how long you've been with us, is it about 18 months, Benji has been at Commonplace as our Vice President Product and Technology. He's been overseeing some really exciting changes in the product that we have at Commonplace and looking at the ways in which our audiences, and that means the people that we're actually engaging with, not just the people who pay us for the product, want it to change into the future. Over to you, Benji.
Thanks, Pam. I appreciate the introduction there, and hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. Digital innovation is what we do, it's the core of what we do here at Commonplace, and we're always looking at new ways to extend digital reach into the planning process, and to do that, to put people at the heart of the planning conversation. For those of you who haven't heard it before, our purpose is to power positive participation, and that's what I'm going to talk about this morning, showing some of the work that we've done. Now, how do we do that? Well, we do all of our research, our design, engineering, and platform operations in-house. We work fast and iteratively, and we release code many times every day. That means we're deploying constant iterations and improvements, which enables us to innovate. So just a little bit about how we do that. And let's start with our newest innovation here on the screen, which Pam also referred to. We work really closely with our customers, and in the space of just 5 weeks, and with the benefit of a daily stand-up with the Watford Borough team, we created a new planning applications platform for Watford, which you can see a screenshot of here. And it's ultimately, the goal is to transform public engagement on their major planning applications. It's much more visual, it's mobile first, and it's a great tool for searching, discovering, and responding to planning applications. As with all Commonplaces, we're focused in this product on transparency, on sharing, on upvoting, on other people's comments. And we think that's the best way to drive collaboration But just to reassure Tony and Robert Sprigg, who put a question in the Q&A about the physical manifestation of planning applications, we've also put in a redesign of a more permanent solution to the physical lamppost poster. And yes, it does include a QR code, but a QR code is no good on its own. The QR code needs to be engaging, it needs to be visual, it needs to have color and logos and a call to action that tells you what to do with the QR code. So if anybody's interested in seeing our future designs for planning application notices, do get in touch. If we pop to the next slide here, looking at local plan, which was definitely referred to there earlier by Chris, the challenge of making the local plan and the planning process more understandable. That's exactly what we've been working on. We do that at all stages of the local plan. So at an early stage strategic level, introducing the plan, talking about the issues and the options and the early strategy. We've done that with Liverpool, Cotswold, Hinckley, and famously Catford, where we consulted on 39 different phases of their local plan. And more recently, we've been developing specific technical solutions around call for sites. We've done that with Waltham Forest and site allocations with Camden, which are quite technical bits, which certainly as somebody new to the planning process took me a few goes to understand. And what we're trying to do here at Commonplace is de-jargonize that and make it understandable by communities. And you can see also on the screen here, the feature that we call commenting on an image. And that's about allowing collaboration on the architectural design code and the issues around beauty, allowing people to comment on an architect's drawing or on design. We're looking forward to seeing also how our mapping tools are going to be able to adapt more to the zonal strategies that Pam referred to from the white paper earlier on. So let's pop to the next slide and talk about master planning. When it comes to this and master planning and development in general, our community heat map is really well positioned. We work on really large and small master plans extensively right across the public and private sector. And we're helping developers gain support for what ultimately will become a statutory consultation. We're helping that through collaboration and co-creation. Similarly, on infrastructure projects like smart motorways or solar farms, we've worked at that sort of scale as well. We've recently overhauled the map, giving it a lot more customization. That means taking it beyond the process of simply dropping a pin on the map with your opinion, which, by the way, is hugely successful for us. But we've now enabled lots more data layers. You can pop a master plan image and sit it and position it onto the map. You can display socio-demographic data, build in custom data sets like walkability or air pollution, show walk times or drive times, view the world in 3D, or view the future world in 3D with our partnership through View City. And now the thing we've recently deployed is the ability to draw a line to show a route, or to draw a shape to highlight a site or a place. And that enables the map to come to life for a whole different set of implementations and thoughts around planning. So we've put geospatial engagement really front and center on hundreds and hundreds of master planning projects, and we're excited to see what else we're going to do in the future. Next up, we're going to talk about estate regeneration and the residential space. And we've been really successful here, as you'll see the stats in the bottom right of the slide, at fostering positive sentiment from communities, achieving great results for planners, winning ballots up and down the country. And engagement covers all phases of a regeneration project, developing the ideas, comparing design code options, commenting by pinning on that artist's impression. We've run 230 of these in all shapes and sizes as well. If you've got a captive audience of residents, we can also work now engagements on an invite-only basis. So inviting a defined audience and closing that consultation to the people that live there as an option. And to partly answer Kay's question on the Q&A, we also support face-to-face engagement using what we call survey mode, taking these engagements door-to-door and face-to-face into the community. And we also provide a reward loop to incentivize responses via what we call the community chest, and feeding back and benefiting the community in the end. We also heard from Chris about the need for continued dialogue, and we don't see estate regeneration as stopping once the planning application has succeeded or the ballot's been won. We can continue with commonplace engagement right through the construction phase. Pam mentioned our post-occupancy work with the Quality of Life Foundation, and we're just starting to really get into resident engagement and ongoing engagement well after those phases have happened. So totally believe in that ongoing conversation that we were talking about earlier. Around community development, we've been supporting communities in a really exciting way. And this example comes from Surrey County Council, who chose Commonplace to build a community of 66,000 respondents who actively took part in a process to collaboratively work together, crowdsourcing, refining, and prioritizing their ideas and their projects and their suggestions on Commonplace. And we supported the strategic design of their grant scheme. And one of the really strong successes was the way people voted on each other's ideas, which encouraged self-promotion, new connections, and ultimately meant that the best projects won the grant money. And we've seen similar approaches in lots of other places: community ground-up development, ideation, Driftfield, for example, that you can see on the left-hand portion of the slide here. There was a question from Richard Neville on the Q&A as well about parish councils, neighbourhood plans, working on a more local scale, and that's something that we've done on many instances as well. I'd be happy to talk to you about those as well. Final slide from me is just really looking at the future innovations that are coming from Commonplace. We've been building out other and new techniques all the time for both private and public sector developments and planning activities. So we're looking at voice capture. So how do we capture comments, not by people typing, but by sharing their words through a microphone, creating more engagement, creating richer data, more image sharing, people taking a photo or a snapshot of something and uploading it into the Commonplace. We're already using what's called natural language processing, which is the ability to analyze text and build much more automated analysis to feed back and understand the key trends and the key themes. So we work with councils, private developers on this right up and down the country: Lewisham, Leeds, LLDC, Landsec, Lend-Lease, all the Ls, tens of development projects live right now on Commonplace that are going through this journey. And so I hope just in the space of a few minutes, I've been able to describe a bit for you how we're doing innovation and continuing to power this positive participation. We've reached over 4.5 million people so far, and we're actively curating this community, joining things up, keeping people in the loop. We've recently also gone live in multiple languages, enabling you to reach an even wider audience. It's that audience of 4.5 million, you can tap into it. It's large, but we find it's also really positive and constructive. So 66% of responses have been supportive. 87% of our community want more engagement. And around picking up on Tony's remark on the problem of one-off consultations, between 20 and 30% of people commenting on Commonplace have previously commented before. So we're seeing people coming back, being brought into more and more conversations. And that all produces tons of data. The thing I haven't shown you today is our analytics and reporting engine, which enables you to bring it all together and draw out the insights, saving you lots and lots of time. And that's effectively me sharing what I wanted to share around how Commonplace so far has been developing in that space. And the only way we can carry on doing it is by hearing all of your ideas. So please do come and talk to me, and love to collaborate on doing more work in this space. I think you're going to see shortly on the screen a poll come up. And with this, you're going to see a few different options. We're offering a number of savings on each of these types of Commonplace modules for those of you who show interest today. So if you'd like to register your interest, select the ones that you're keen on, those themes that you can see on the screen, and our friendly team of specialists are going to be in touch in the next couple of days and following up with you as to how we can shape your master planning or estate regeneration, community development, and so on. So do tick away, and I'll hand back over to Pam, who's going to continue with the webinar.
Thank you, Benji, and brilliantly brought in exactly 20 minutes left for questions, nothing to do with good chairing, just extremely good panelists. However, I'm going to make an apology. I'm not very well at the moment, so I didn't notice I was joining a panel which, if it hadn't been for me, would have been for white men of people like us, Tony, and I apologise for that. Commonplace doesn't normally do that, and it won't again. We do look for a diverse panel, and I'm really sorry we don't have a local authority rep here. We, as you know, intended to, because I think a lot of the questions I'm seeing are about how we help local authorities who are incredibly under-resourced to make the most of this opportunity in this system. Benji said a lot about what we can do to get out to communities that want to engage. Tony's very important point: how do we reach the people who just don't think there's any point, don't trust us? And I'm going to, against all my normal intentions, ask a question which is from someone who doesn't dare tell us their name, which therefore I would normally ignore their question, but I think it's an important one. The people creating these tools work very closely with developers and housing consultants due to funding and politics. They use these digital tools and algorithms to push through controversial developments, as seen in the demolition of council estates and the transfer of council assets to the private sector. Residents get even more disillusioned with local politics and see this as yet another power and land grab at the cost to the environment and the community. Perhaps you are part of the problem. Are we? Tony, what do you think?
Well, it's a point I raised about who's creating the new digital world, you know, whose values are being embedded within it. Although there's so much to sort of welcome at one level with the sort of policy focus on it and the investment that's going in and the new sort of team within government, you also wonder whose voices are being listened to, who's on the inside, and what's coming out. So as with all things digital, it's a mirror of society. It isn't somehow some solution to society's challenges, and that will only come with active intervention. And clearly there are some who are more on the side of the angels in that, and some who are less on the side of the angels. We need to be very conscious of that, and we need to provide support. So the new opportunities that are being presented are ones that are going to, it's impossible to sort of navigate around some of those challenges, but they are going to provide us with a better set of opportunities and a better set of outcomes than we've got under the current ones. I mean, it sort of goes without saying, I think, Commonplace is an example of an organisation trying to do that, which is why I'm on this call and I'm not, participating in some other conversations which are much more sort of narrowly based in what they're trying to achieve.
Well, we're very grateful for that, Tony. And I think Benji said quite a lot about how we try to make sure that we help our clients. And there's another question which I'll come to in a minute, which I'll direct at him, how we help our clients to make sure they're hearing all the voices that not only want to be heard, but need to be heard. But Chris, how as a developer do you try to develop that trust?
I think fundamentally the question is about trust. And to answer the anonymous question a little bit, I think, yeah, the sector is part of the problem. It's probably also got to be part of the solution as well. But that takes time. I worked a long time ago. Many people on this call will be familiar with Grosvenor's Trust in Placemaking campaign that they launched, which then kind of led into their community charter. So I wrote the Trust in Placemaking research as a consultant, working very closely with the business, and we ran the polling for it. And there were some easy headlines from that polling. The thing that came out from the research to me, and the thing I spent a long time kind of really sort of banging the drum about in Grosvenor as a business, and then I've tried to take into Landsec, is that trust is about behaviour and it's about accountability. So behaviour takes a long time to shift perception on, and there are, in the broader real estate sector, there are some really good actors doing some amazing things. I've mentioned Grosvenor, I'm a big fan of Crown Estate, I think do really, really well. You and I as a business we've talked about. I'm trying to make sure we are increasingly one of those sort of better behaved businesses that people can look to and understand they can trust us. And that is an important thing about how we conduct ourselves across all aspects of our business. So we're obviously talking about planning in this conversation, and planning is always a very, very tense moment because that sense of accountability and power really kind of drives distrust. So you need to act really, really carefully in a considered way to adjust that. We're also a landlord, and people don't really like landlords either that much. So actually how we behave across the entire waterfront of our business is really imperative to sort of drive trust. The other point is about accountability. So at a basic level, do you do the things you said you were going to do? And if you don't, how are you held to account for it? And I think that's one of the big challenges around planning is, the promises that are made, the discussions that are had early on in kind of planning process. And then when determination happens and the scheme gets built, there can be years between those things. So how do you bring accountability forward? By working with local authorities and communities and giving them the tools to hold you to account. Someone mentioned on the questions, how does the community charter for Landsec come about? That's one of the big thrusts of it, is actually how do we make ourselves more accountable and drive behaviour across our business?
Can I just follow that up then with
course.
Naveen's question? What are the key objectives of your Landsec community?
Yeah, so of course, it's not published yet. In fact, I'm presenting it to our leadership team next week with a hope to rolling out very, very soon, but it's already starting to inform lots of the engagement we're doing. We're a business that's driven by our purpose, which is sustainable places, connecting communities and realising potential. And the community charter is basically to deliver on that sense of purpose. So we want to create successful places, but we know we can't do that from our offices in Victoria. We need to understand what local people, what local businesses, what local areas need. So it's really about trying to standardise how we go about that across our business. And like I said, we're a big real estate business, right? So we're very physically present in Victoria. We are active in London boroughs from Southwark to Lewisham to Wandsworth to Hammersmith and Fulham, City of London Corporation, but also in Leeds, increasingly in Manchester. We're about to do something quite big in Glasgow and so on. And so you need to kind of, like my point about making sure we're accountable. We want to set out to people how they should expect us to engage with them and hold us to account for the promises we make, not just in what we deliver, but actually how we behave and how we conduct ourselves. And we think that's a big part of delivering on our purpose.
In a way, enabling people to expect to be engaged is a long way from where we are now, isn't it? Bob Eden has commented that people simply don't pay attention and then wonder, where did that come from? How are we going to help create that positive loop? How do we stop people forgetting? And Benji, how do we reach the people who aren't engaging with us anyway?
So one of the key steps that we always try to elaborate on with our engagement partners and customers is to figure out how you're going to build your audience well in advance of actually building the content and building out your commonplace and the story that you want to tell. So where are we going to go? Where are we going to position this commonplace within the community? And it might be QR codes out and about in coffee shops. It might be leaflets through front doors. It might be all sorts of different local initiatives like that. The channels that we find to be most successful tend to be those that are most embedded in the community. WhatsApp is the number one for us in terms of reaching new people and bringing new people into common places that represent the community that are out there that might not otherwise naturally engage in this sort of thing. But through Commonplace, you can create all manner of different tracking codes to really know where your traffic's coming from and to understand that, and then to really major on the channels that are working for you really well, which is really helpful. We do a lot of work around social media. We also help some of our partners to direct targeted paid social media ads, and that enables us to reach some marginalized in the sense of planning communities around. There's a lot of sharing features within Commonplace, so we're always encouraging people to share what they've seen with their neighbours and to help things go viral. I mentioned the multilingual aspects. We can translate Commonplace into any language, and we've recently gone live with right to left languages as well, again helping us to reach communities that might not otherwise be able to use Commonplace. We have survey mode I mentioned earlier as well, which enables you to go out face to face, door knocking and asking exactly the same questions, engaging with exactly the same content as you would if you were sitting in front of a computer. And that can also be used to upload paper questionnaires, again, a way of reaching some audiences you might not be able to otherwise. And the final thing is, I think, being able to understand how far you have reached. So not just which channels were successful, but one of the things we do within the Commonplace dashboard is show our partners a comparison of the population which lives there by ethnicity and age with the population that actually responded to the Commonplace. And when you map that, you can start to see the places where your campaign, if you like, where your engagement is underrepresenting or overrepresenting. So you might find that in the northeast portion of the map, you actually haven't got a certain ethnicity or a certain age group, and you can target your future work to go and really start the conversations in that neighborhood specifically. So that's in a nutshell what we recommend doing to try and get into those more edge groups that wouldn't otherwise come to a town hall meeting with cucumber sandwiches and cups of tea.
I mean, just from a developer perspective, that last bit is actually, to my mind, one of the most powerful things on how we're using Commonplace. Just being able to say, yeah, okay, we've done really well over here, but there is a gap and we need to address that gap. I think too often voices get marginalized because I've always hated the phrase hard to reach groups. They're never that hard to reach if you can be bothered to go and find them. And I think the good thing about Commonplace is it just lays it all quite bare. Like, you're not hearing from this group of people, so what are we going to do about it?
Yes, I think over the last 5 years I've been involved, one of the most important things is how we have helped our clients to use the tools better and think about their communities better. And I think what you've all been saying is that if this is going to be a transformation, it's going to be a transformation led from the bottom up, not from the top down. I think there are lots of questions which are specific, and I'm going to ask if the panelists would not mind answering those afterwards, because we're not going to have time to get them to them all. We've answered quite a few that are about how we reach out beyond the immediate people engaged. Let's move on to how we upskill the professionals. Simeon's question about how you see the upskilling of future professionals and community members happening. What are the barriers that we face when participants need to be guided through the platform, but also our clients need to be guided through the platforms? And what are we going to do about the fact that local authorities are lacking the resource to engage as effectively as they'd like with their communities? Who'd like to start on that?
Sorry, Tony, let's jump in.
Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, on the kind of the resourcing of local government is a fundamental point here, which we can't shy away from. I used to work in local government many years ago, as austerity came in fact, and the available spending power of those local authorities, therefore their ability to attract and retain good talent, and then invest in services that enable them to do the combination of new digital, the shoe leather to get it done, and so on, has been incredibly challenged. And I think there is a piece there. There is no lack of desire in local government to do great, innovative, sustainable things. The challenge to get it done is nearly all about resourcing. And I think as a private sector business, one of the things we're continually saying to central government is resourcing local government effectively is actually one of the best ways to unlock lots of the challenges facing society at the moment. So I'll stop banging that same drum for a moment. Tony, maybe you'd like to come in.
Yeah, I just agree with that entirely. I mean, what can we do about it? Lobby like hell and keep making that point. You know, who doesn't benefit from having a local government that works? And in the scheme of public finances, again, this is, you know, it's not small change, but it's not massive. And I think the problem is, it's not, as it were, just a pound, shillings and pence problem. It is a talent issue. So the two are linked, but increasingly, well, not increasingly, we are now at a point where people are, you know, barely able to meet statutory responsibilities. They are absolutely sort of not being encouraged to do the kind of joined up placemaking, soft relationships, which is critical to all of the things that we're talking about. So it's not surprising that it keeps falling over there. And yeah, it's not surprising that people then scream and squeal, you know, when their experience with local government is so bad, and you get into a vicious cycle rather than a virtuous one. But there's no overnight. At least that was acknowledged, even if there's been little action. It is now, I suppose, a more acknowledged piece of public policy debate than it being swept under the carpet, which it has been for far too long.
I think, though, there is great practice out there. I don't disagree with anything you've said, Tony, about the worst cases, but there are some really, really good examples where local government is managing, despite the resource cuts, to make this work. And there are some great new ways of helping them. I'm a huge fan of public practice, which we set up following the Mayor's Design Group's look at where the resources in London were compared with where the development in London was. And naturally, it was completely disassociated. And I think the public practice almost internees who've gone in and supported local government and lifted those who have the ambition with the resources and the skills to fulfill that ambition, even despite resource constraints, really needs to be recognised. Otherwise, we'll sink into a slough of despond. I think there's some really great practice out there, and what we need is for it to be shared across local government. and using some of, for example, at the LLDC, we have a great team of planners, we have a great team of designers, and we shouldn't forget that architects used to be more plentiful in local government than in private practice 50 years ago. And now there are very, 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 very few. So I think there's a real task to share the best practice, as well as to recognise the huge difficulties that many local authorities have. Benji, do you want to say anything about the local authorities we work with and where that best practice might rest?
Sure, I'm probably not the best person in Complace to really like dive into the local authorities, but you know, we work with most of the London local authorities and then spreading out across the country, and the big ones, and then also some neighbourhood and community groups too, like we discussed before. The thing I was going to say before when you were asking about upskilling was that if kind of WordPress invented and helped the world build websites without needing to be a developer, Commonplace helps people build community engagement without needing to know a terrible amount about how to do that, because a platform is really around self-service, and it's around learning by doing. So the platform will help and guide you through drag and drop templates and suggested questions and formats for doing things to get your word out there and to start your engagement. And we complement that with a really strong CS team, customer success team, who work with the local authorities and with the private developers shoulder to shoulder to ensure you're not building anything into the Complace that is likely to affect it in an adverse way, and to make sure you're going to maximize what you need. So if WordPress built that, you still sometimes need a real expert to come and pepper in the additional insights. And I think that's what Complace is trying to do, to bring that together so that you don't need to be skilled. You can kind of learn along the way.
And I think before you joined us, Benji, it took us a couple of years to realise how much that was an important part of what we offer, that actually if we simply gave the tool to many of our clients, developers as well as local authorities, they simply wouldn't use them in a way that answered the questions that so many people are asking, which is how do you reach not the unreachable, but actually the people who don't believe there's any point in being engaged because they've found in the past there hasn't been. And that's why I think we only have a couple of minutes left, but I think the thing I really want to touch on and not lose is the importance of the feedback loop. I think Chris talked about accountability. Surely an enormous part of building trust is about making sure that people know not only that they are heard, but that they're listened to, and see the changes that they make actually come out on the ground. Doesn't mean that we'll please everyone all of the time. One of our greatest successes with Waltham Forest has been the Mini Hollands, and yet there are still many people who hate them. But most people think that they've been fantastically useful, and the literally years cut off children's mortality rates is extraordinary. So we're never in planning going to please all of the people all of the time. That's one thing we do know. What we really must have a duty to is making sure that we understand what all of the people want and need, and that they hear why we can't meet some of those needs. And that, I think, is to a final question, which is people don't want development. People don't want housing near them. Why and how can we make them want it? I'm not expecting 10-second answers from anybody. But I think there is, taking right back to Chris's point, a politics here, which is that right over the last 10 years, long before the planning white paper, governments have been trying to get communities to want new housing. And the lack of trust that Tony's talked about is why they don't. But also the results they get is why they don't. So planning will only work if we get great design in those plans. And that's another area of lack of talent, maybe, but mainly lack of resources and people behind it. That's my final word. Sorry, panelists. We've hit the 12 o'clock mark. Really grateful to you. Sorry to everyone that we haven't answered your questions, but we're going to take them all down and direct them to panelists where it's obvious, and try and answer them if not. I don't think a sales pitch is a poll, but if any of you wanted any of those resources, I know we'll be straight on to you. And I'd like to say, I have hope in this. It's going to be, it's already a transformation. It's real opportunity to build from the bottom up fantastic new systems which engage communities and give us data we've never had to design well. So thank you all very much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed watching this, and hope to see you at the next Commonplace webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank